Let's imagine London in the summer of 1666. It's not the grand stone-clad city we know today, far from it. This London is a medieval maze, a chaotic jumble of narrow, winding streets. Houses built mostly of timber and daub lean precariously. Their upper stories jut out, almost kissing across alleyways. It is a city of shadows and smells, the air thick with coal smoke, the smell of unwashed bodies, and the lingering fear of disease. The Great Plague of 1665 had just loosened its grip. The city lay traumatized, depopulated, suspicious. Tens of thousands had perished. A nervous energy crackled through the populace. The city itself was a fire hazard of epic proportions. Warehouses along the Thames stuffed to the rafters with flammable goods, oil, pitch, tar, brandy, gunpowder, left over from the Second Anglo-Dutch War. Blacksmiths' forges glowed at all hours. Bakers' ovens glowed at all hours. The water supply, creaking wooden pipes, the New River, laughably inadequate. Firefighting was primitive. Bucket chains and clumsy hooks to pull down burning buildings. London was, in every sense, a tinderbox. Not if, but when a great fire would come. Our story begins in the dead of night, early hours. 2nd September 1666, Pudding Lane near London Bridge. Thomas Farriner's house and bakery, a small fire begins. The official story is simple. Farriner failed to extinguish the oven embers. A stray spark ignited nearby firewood. A tragic accident, or was it? Woken not by baking bread, but by acrid smoke flames creeping up the wooden staircase, a frantic scramble to escape. Farriner, his wife, his daughter clambered from an upstairs window onto a neighbouring roof, terrifying in their nightclothes. The maidservant was too frightened. She became the fire's first victim. Pause. Examine Farriner's testimony. He swore the oven was damped down. He said he checked it himself. He claimed the hearth was out by midnight. Was he covering up or telling the truth? If true, the fire started elsewhere in the house, which suggests a darker possibility, not an accident. This wasn't any bakery, a poor parish, a crowded parish, dangerously close to river warehouses. Warehouses full of the lifeblood of commerce and of highly flammable materials. As the fire consumed the Farriner bakery, it did not take long to spread. The strong easterly wind, which had been a mere nuisance for weeks, now became the fire's greatest ally. It fanned the flames, lifting burning embers and sparks high into the night sky. These embers were then carried like devilish seeds, landing on the dry thatched roofs and landing on the wooden eaves of nearby buildings. The houses on Pudding Lane were packed so tightly together that the fire simply hopped from one roof to another, a hungry beast leaping across the narrow gaps. Within an hour, the entire street was a raging inferno. The initial response from the local citizens was chaotic and wholly ineffective. People were woken by the crackling of flames and the panicked shouts of "Fire! Fire!" They formed ragged bucket chains, passing leather buckets of water from the Thames, but their efforts were like trying to put out a bonfire with a teacup. The heat was so intense that it turned the water to steam before it even reached the flames. The fire was simply too big, too hot, and moving too fast. The parish constables were overwhelmed, their authority melting away in the face of such a terrifying and unprecedented blaze. As dawn broke on Sunday morning, the Lord Mayor of London, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, arrived on the scene. His reaction, or rather his lack of reaction, has gone down in history as a catastrophic failure of leadership. When urged to order the pulling down of houses to create a firebreak, the standard, if brutal, firefighting technique of the day, he was dismissive. He worried about the cost and who would pay for the destroyed properties. Famously, he is reported to have scoffed, "Pish! A woman might piss it out," before returning to the comfort of his bed. This single, arrogant decision may have sealed London's fate. Bloodworth's complacency allowed the fire a crucial head start. By the time he and the city authorities finally grasped the scale of the danger, it was already too late. While the Lord Mayor slept, another Londoner was watching with growing alarm. This was Samuel Pepys, a naval administrator and a prolific diarist. It is thanks to Pepys that we have such a vivid, personal, and downright terrifying account of the Great Fire. He was woken by his maid on Sunday morning, who told him of a fire in the distance. Curious but unconcerned, he looked out the window, thought it far away, and went back to sleep. A few hours later, reports were far more frightening. The fire wasn't dying, it was growing. Realizing the gravity, Pepys went to investigate. He walked to the Tower of London, climbed to a high vantage point, and saw the full horror. He described one entire arch of fire, a bow with a glittering arrowhead. He saw people trying to save belongings, flinging them into boats on the Thames, piling them in streets where the fire caught them. He saw utter chaos and realized the city's leadership was failing. This was no ordinary fire, an apocalypse. Pepys acted. He took a boat to Whitehall to report to the top. He found King Charles II and James, Duke of York, and delivered a stark first-hand account. The king listened. He ordered the Lord Mayor to demolish houses immediately. Spare no house. As Sunday bled into Monday, 3rd September, any hope of containing the fire vanished. The wind had not lessened. If anything, it had grown stronger, fanning the flames into a terrifying firestorm. The phenomenon created its own weather system, with superheated air rising and sucking in more oxygen at ground level, creating a whirlwind of fire. The blaze was now moving with terrifying speed, devouring the timber-framed houses at a rate of hundreds of meters per hour. It marched west and north, leaving a trail of absolute destruction in its wake. The heart of London's commercial district was now directly in its path. The fire swept through Lombard Street and Cornhill, the city's financial centre. The grand halls of the city's livery companies, the stone-built Royal Exchange, the very symbol of London's commercial might, were all consumed by the inferno. The heat was so intense that it melted the lead roof of St. Paul's Cathedral and cracked its ancient stone walls. Eyewitnesses described the noise as a deafening roar, punctuated by the crash of falling buildings and the occasional explosion as hidden stores of gunpowder or spirits went up. The air was thick with smoke and ash, turning day into a choking, hellish twilight. Panic gripped the population. The city's social order began to break down. The narrow streets were clogged with people and carts, a frantic, desperate exodus of citizens trying to save their families and a few precious belongings. The River Thames became a scene of chaos, jammed with boats and barges overloaded with furniture, goods and terrified refugees. Price gouging was rampant, with cart drivers and boatmen charging extortionate fees to carry people and their possessions to safety. In a city gripped by fear and paranoia, it was only natural that people would look for someone to blame. The idea that this devastating fire was a mere accident seemed impossible, laughable even. Surely such a catastrophe had to be the work of an enemy. As the flames raged, so too did the rumors. The most persistent and powerful rumor was that the fire was a deliberate act of arson, a Catholic plot connected to England's enemies, the French, the Dutch, with whom the country was at war. This was the 17th century, a time of intense religious and political division. Old hatreds died hard. Foreigners were immediately targeted. French, Dutch, Irish. Mobs roamed the streets, hunting for anyone with a foreign accent. Innocent people were attacked, beaten, and in some cases lynched based on nothing more than suspicion and xenophobia. Any person seen carrying fireballs was accused of being an arsonist. Household items, lumps of burning debris. The chaos of the fire provided the perfect cover for settling old scores and indulging in violent prejudice. The search for a scapegoat had become as wild and uncontrollable as the fire itself. The authorities did little to quell the hysteria, perhaps seeking to deflect from their own incompetence. Suspects were rounded up and interrogated. One of the most famous cases was that of Robert Hubert, a simple-minded French watchmaker from Rouen. Hubert was apprehended and confessed, under duress most likely, to starting the fire. He claimed to be an agent of the Pope and that he had thrown a fireball into the Fariner bakery. By Tuesday, the 4th of September, the fire was still raging, showing no signs of stopping. It had destroyed the medieval heart of London and was now threatening the Western District's palace of Whitehall, Westminster Abbey. With the civic authorities in disarray, King Charles II James, Duke of York, took personal command of the firefighting efforts. This was a remarkable and unprecedented step. The king, sleeves rolled up, was seen in the streets covered in soot, handing out money and encouragement to the firefighters. He was no longer a distant monarch, but a hands-on commander-in-chief in a war against the flames. James, Duke of York, who had military experience, organized the demolition efforts with ruthless efficiency. He set up command posts around the city, using soldiers and sailors to create firebreaks. Instead of simply pulling down houses with hooks, James ordered them to be blown up with gunpowder. This was a dramatic and dangerous tactic, but it was the only thing that could create gaps wide enough to halt the fire's advance. The explosions rocked the city, adding to the cacophony of the inferno, but they represented a glimmer of hope. The decisive battle took place at the eastern and western edges of the fire. When the smoke finally cleared, the scale of the devastation was breathtaking. The fire had raged for 4 days and had destroyed roughly 80% of the city within the old Roman walls. Over 13,200 houses, 87 parish churches, St. Paul's Cathedral, the Royal Exchange, the Guildhall, countless other public buildings were gone. They were simply erased from the landscape, a vast, smoking wasteland of ash and rubble. An estimated 100,000 people were left homeless, makeshift shelters in the fields outside the city walls, Moorfields, Islington. Miraculously, the official death toll was astonishingly low, recorded as being in single figures. This number is, quite frankly, difficult to believe. It likely only counted prominent individuals. The poor, the elderly, those incinerated beyond recognition by the intense heat, over 1,200 degrees Celsius. The true number of fatalities was almost certainly far higher. Their stories lost in the ashes. The economic cost was staggering, estimated at around £10 million. An astronomical sum for the 17th century and a devastating blow to the nation's economy. In the immediate aftermath, the priority was to provide for the homeless and prevent social breakdown. The king issued proclamations to set up markets and ensure a supply of food to the refugee camps. But even as the city mourned, plans were already being made for its rebirth. This was a unique opportunity, a blank slate upon which a new, grander London could be built. Architects like the brilliant Christopher Wren saw a chance to redesign the city.